Good morning, everyone, and hopefully you had a wonderful weekend and are looking forward to getting back to trading here come Monday. Before we get into the actually plays that I'm looking at for the upcoming week, want to do a overall market breakdown and kind of seeing what our indices are showing us coming into this new trading week. So we'll start off here with the ES futures on the daily time frame. If we zoom in here, we can see that we had this strong flush off the 21 EMA down to the -3 ATR. We got our nice reversion here at the beginning of last week, and then we kind of started to reject this 21 EMA once again to the downside. So this could be a start to another fall to potentially making lower lows, or at least a retest of these previous lows. And if we look here on the daily time frame, we can draw in some support levels and then also some resistance levels. So if we come back here to around these all-time highs areas, if we just draw in a line here, we have a strong resistance out here. It looks like we were going to get that breakout, but quickly got rejected and fell back below it. And if we come back here to a all-time high that we created, we can see that this is basically the area now that we're rejecting right now, and we could see further falling. And then if we come down here to some previous lows, we can see that that was a place of support that had recently held on the market. So these are kind of the levels I'm looking at coming into the week here on the ES. I am looking more for price action to fall back down to these lows just due to the overall structure with us not having any stacked EMAs. We're in a deceleration stage, and we have been rejecting this 21 EMA now to the downside. So this is kind of my target, not specifically for this week, but I think that the market could easily come and retest these lows. And then if we also look here at the weekly time frame, this is also something that it is telling us is that we have had 3 consecutive weeks of closes below that 21 EMA. We are still having stacked EMAs on this time frame, but I think that if this week we do get any more selling, this will go away. The structure alone has been holding this 50 simple moving average, but if this weekly low compression squeeze does start to fire to the downside, I think we could potentially see a lot more selling in the weeks ahead in the market. I know I've said it before in some different videos, but the area that I'm looking at now for a long-term support is the 21 EMA on a monthly time frame. We still have our histogram above that zero, but it is losing that bullish momentum from this long run. So this is the area for, months and months out, but it could be a place of support here eventually for the market to come hit. As of now, it has been holding that 8 EMA, which is nice to see, and if we can keep doing that, we might just chop here back and forth until we get a new weekly squeeze to maybe propel this stock market back to the upside. So if we come back here to the daily, we'll go on to the Qs if they load. Alrighty, so we got the Qs here, already some pre-drawn in levels of support and resistance here, but if we look at the overall structure, it is probably one of the more bearish sectors here. Completely rejected this 21 EMA here, fell down below the -3 ATR, which usually doesn't happen too often, but it did get that nice reversion, and then off of that reversion, it has started to fall down, looking to go back, I think, down to these previous lows. So basically very similar to the ES here. We do have negatively stacked EMAs, which we did not have on the ES, which is also another bearish indicator, which is saying it's a little more bearish. But then if we come to a weekly time frame on the Qs, similar story. You've got your 3 closes below the weekly. Basically rejecting this 21 EMA on the weekly this last week. Tried to get up there, and then all the sellers came back in through the rest of the week and closed it well, even below this 50 simple. And then another thing to note compared to the ES is that we do have bearish momentum on the squeeze histogram. And if this does fire, we should get more selling pressure here on the Qs as well. If we come back here to a daily time frame, we can go on to the Dow. So the Dow has done its reversion now, and it came up here and it's getting rejected Not as hard as the Qs or the ES is holding this 8 EMA on the daily time frame, but overall its structure is still relatively bearish. We do not have any stacked EMAs, and we are trading below that 21 EMA. But if we come to a weekly time frame, this one, just like the others, has been holding below the 21 EMA for 3 weeks in a row. This weekly squeeze, its histogram is still above that zero, so if the Dow can reclaim this 21 EMA, this squeeze maybe could start to roll back up to the upside and we could get the squeeze to fire. But if the overall market starts to sell off, I think that this squeeze will then just start to fire to the downside as well. And I think that's probably the higher probability that we are looking at going forward. And now, last but not least, here we have the Russell, and the Russell has just been getting smacked. So if we look here on the daily time frame, you get this push up here, this large flush to -3, reversion, flush to -2. Tried to reclaim this 21 EMA, got rejected by the 50 simple, and then we had this large flush down to -3. We got a reversion, didn't even get all the way back up to the 21 EMA before the sellers came right back in and started pushing it lower. We have negatively stacked EMAs, we're in a deceleration stage, so the Russell overall is the most bearish indice in my mind, definitely looking like it's in a strong downtrend. And if we come to a weekly time frame, this is one of the reasons why. It's because we had this weekly squeeze fire to the downside and officially fire here last week, giving it that large push down to -3 ATR on that weekly time frame. So we could see a few more weeks of selling here on the Russells themselves, because this usually gives you about 6 to 8 bars of momentum. So we could look for potentially 6 to 8 weeks of more selling pressure here on the Russell going forward. Could potentially even retest some previous highs here on a weekly time frame, because this one has been selling off quite strong. Or we could start to look for that reversion to the mean. Either one will eventually happen. So now getting into the actual plays I'm looking at for the upcoming week. The first one here is going to be Kinder Morgan to the upside. I have a few plays to the upside and a few to the downside, just depending on what this market is going to give us. But all their structures are looking pretty good either way. So if we go to Kinder Morgan here, we can see that we have been holding this 21 EMA perfectly on the daily time frame. We have our stacked EMAs, and we also have a high compression squeeze setting up, which means that once it does make a move, it should be a quite large move. The only thing I don't like about it right now is that we do have this bearish momentum. Ideally want to start seeing these yellow bars pop up. That means that the sellers are starting to slow down and buyers are starting to come in. So that's one thing I will be looking for, but ideally we'd have that nice flush here back down to the 21 EMA, get an entry there, and look for a push up here back into these highs. Another thing to look at here is the weekly time frame. We do have a low compression squeeze looking to fire to the upside with its structure looking pretty good, holding this 8 EMA nicely. Don't have stacked EMAs because it's been in this chop for a while with this low compression squeeze kind of building, so hopefully this can start to get going to that upside. Next one here is MO. Had a nice rally here to the upside, and now as we develop this new daily squeeze, we can see we kind of start to consolidate around that 21 EMA. Like how we have our squeeze histogram above that zero line, and we're in a high compression squeeze, and we've been holding that 21 EMA perfectly. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times we've touched it and bounced off of it back to the upside, which means that buyers are in control. So once again, ideally I'm looking for another touchdown to this 21 EMA for an entry before this squeeze should propel it back up to the upside. So the next one here is actually to the downside. With the overall market and the Qs especially looking bearish, I'm looking at Microsoft to the downside. Its structure kind of mirrors the Qs quite well. So if we look here, we can see we had this large flush down to way below -3 ATR. We got a reversion, and this is the time where we want to get short once again. So we had that push up to the 21 EMA and then rejected it, closing right around that 8 EMA. We have this daily squeeze setting up with the momentum. It's gaining, but it's looking to probably roll back over again, and it is still below that zero, which means it is more bearish than bullish. We do not have stacked EMAs as well. And another reason I like this one is that if we come to a 3-day, we have this low compression squeeze firing to the downside with good bearish momentum, and it's rejecting this 21 EMA a few times now, showing bearishness. And then last but not least, if we come to the weekly time frame, this one is also starting to show bearish momentum, and it's having closes below the 21 EMA. So everything about Microsoft now is leading to believe that it is bearish, so definitely looking for short plays on this one as well. Look for an entry around 308 if you can get one. That would be my ideal, but anywhere in between these 8 EMA and 21 EMA is a good entry for this one. Next one here to the upside is Wells Fargo. The banks have been doing pretty good here lately. And what I like to see is that we have this daily squeeze setting up. Got this yellow bar here, which means the buyers are already starting to come back in. Is a little extended to that upside. I don't usually like to buy anything over +1 ATR. So ideally, I'm looking for a pullback to either the 8 EMA or ideally the 21 EMA for an entry, but would take one at the 8 due to it looking quite strong here. We have nicely stacked EMAs, and our price is holding well above that 21. And then I'm looking hopefully for this to start turning into these light blue bars, which means that it is in a bullish state and that the buyers have started to come in quite strong. Then if we look here on the weekly time frame, this just gives us more confidence that this will keep going to the upside as we have nice bullish momentum on this low compression squeeze, which should push it higher for potentially a few weeks going forward. Alrighty, last but not least here on the list, we have win to the downside. If we come in here, we can see we have negatively stacked EMAs here. We have some bearish momentum on the squeeze histogram, and our price action is holding below that 21 EMA. So if we get in here even closer, yeah, this would have probably been an ideal entry here actually last Friday, just didn't quite see it. But that doesn't mean we can't get one this week, so definitely look for price to reject this level around probably 85.75 around there to go back down to the downside with this daily squeeze propelling it down there. And then also if we look here on a 3-day, a similar story here. We have negatively stacked EMAs, deceleration stage, and price is holding below that 21 EMA with our histogram below that 0 line. So this one should also keep pushing it to the downside. And then the big one here is the weekly. That also has bearish momentum. It is in a high compression squeeze holding below the 21 EMA. So this should also keep pushing it back down to the downside. So this one is looking really good in my opinion for shorts coming into this week. So this is the options watch list that I have for the week. Hopefully you all have a few other stocks you can add to your own watch list. And let's go out there on Monday and start making some money, everybody.